external framework of life, we hide the seeds and the sins of unbelief. Surely it cannot be, says somebody. Yes, it certainly is, says God. It was that which Jesus confronted the Pharisees of in John chapter 8. The Pharisees who were so consumed with their historical and religious background, who felt that they were free and that they were absolutely on track. And Jesus confronts them and he says, if you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciples and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And they answered him, we are Abraham's descendants, and we've never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that? We shall be set free. Same kind of answer you get in the land of the brave and the home of the free. And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Answer, free? Hey, I'm free. Don't you realize this is a free country? This is free speech. This is amendment number 1, number 2, whatever it might be. This is Freedom City, man. Okay, well, hang on a minute. Just hold it there. Let me tell you what Jesus said next. Jesus replied, I tell you the truth. Everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Oh, that kind of freedom. Yeah. Well, you know, I've got a very strong religious background, and I'm a nice kind of guy, and really I've tried to do my best. I live by the Sermon on the Mount, and a lot of my family are involved in ministry, and I've got a friend down in the southern states, and he's a great man. You'd love to meet him. And hey, hang on a minute. Do you want to know who your father is? I know who my father is, says the individual. Are you casting doubt on the background of my life? No. Jesus said to them, hey, if God were your father, you would love me. For I came from God and now I'm here. I haven't come on my own, but he sent me. Why is my language unclear to you? Answer, because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet because I tell you the truth, you do not believe in me. Now, loved ones, I hope you're building up a picture of what it means to minister the gospel in our day. I hope you're beginning to see the awesomeness of the task. That it is not simply to go to men and women who are already pre-programmed for faith. It is not to go to men and women and say to them, would you like to have a little something to make your life more palatable? It's not to go to men and women and say, you know, I have an answer for your depression here. In Christ we have an answer to all of those things. It is to go to men and women and to say, do you know something? If you sin, you are a slave to sin. Do you know that you have a further problem? The God of this age is blinding your mind to the truth, even as I speak to you of it. Do you know what you're going to need to do? You're going to have to cast yourself on God's mercy. The mercy which sent his Son down to Calvary and which sent his Spirit into your heart with the word of truth this morning. Then we get conversion. Then we get transformation. Then we get movement from the broad road to the narrow road. Not simply people continuing on the broad road with a little bit of Jesus in their knapsack. And Paul, when he ministered, no wonder he said, I'm open, I'm plain. Boy, was he plain. So plain that when he moved around in the Acts of the Apostles, they stoned him, clubbed him, beat him. They would have killed him in the early days if they could. And which, of course, in the end they did. Now, for those of you who are wondering, please notice in verse 4 that Satan is the god of this age with a small g. He's not really a god. He's a no god. Satan is a created thing. This is not dualism. His power is usurped. His power is temporary. His power is in no sense absolute. Satan is a creature, and therefore his control is the influence of one created thing over another created thing. It's very, very important that we understand that. And Satan is on a big, long rope which is fixed firmly to the cross of Christ. And he is able only to move as God gives him length on the rope. but he is delighted at all the godless thought forms of our day. He's delighted at the broad sweep of secularism in our educational establishments. He is happy to aid and abet the incipient unbelief of a generation growing up. And Paul says, therefore, we do not lose heart. There are bogus preachers. There are blind unbelievers. Why doesn't he lose heart? Well, one, because God gave him the gospel, and two, because of the kind of gospel he gave him. And that brings us to our second point. Not only do we need to ascertain what is the environment in which he proclaimed the truth, but what is the essence of the truth he proclaimed. Verse 5, for we do not preach ourselves. That's good. What a temptation there is to do that. How easy it is for those of us who preach week by week to so intrude upon our message that we would seek to attach men and women to ourselves rather than to attach them to Christ. Such must never be the case. It is a danger. Paul had already said in his first letter, we came to Corinth in fear and weakness and in trembling, and we set it as our goal to know nothing among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. So when you said Paul, people said Jesus Christ. When you said Paul, people said the gospel. When you said his name, they knew what he was about. And so he proclaimed, one, the light of the gospel. He proclaimed the light of the gospel. There in verse 4, these people, he says, cannot see the light of the gospel. It's a lovely phrase. It's obviously the converse of darkness. Again, it is something that was borne in upon Paul's own experience. In Acts chapter 26, to which you may care to return for just a moment, Paul is giving an explanation of his ministry to King Agrippa. And in verse 18 of Acts chapter 26, he tells King Agrippa that at the end of his conversation with the risen Lord on the Damascus road, Jesus said this to him, I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Stop for a moment, and there is a perfect verse which gives you a theology of conversion. What does it mean for a man and woman to be converted from their sins? This is what happens to them. Their eyes are opened as the gospel is proclaimed and the Spirit brings it forth. They turned from darkness to light. They are now living under a new power source. No longer Satan, but God. They were once under the guilt of their sins. Now they receive forgiveness. They were once wanderers and aliens. Now they have been given a place among those who are sanctified. And so Paul says, I am proclaiming the light of the gospel. And in the 6th verse, here back in 2 Corinthians 4, he draws a parallel between the work of creation and the work of new creation. He says, just in the same way as God dispelled darkness when he created light in Genesis chapter 1, so in the spiritual sphere, it is God who drives back the darkness of sin, the darkness of unbelief from the hearts of men and women. And do you think he knew what he was talking about? If ever a guy could talk about the light of the gospel, it has to be the Apostle Paul. I mean, the light of the gospel. You turn back to Acts chapter 26 and look again, and you'll find something that you may have considered before, but I'd never really thought about. You know there was a light which shone from heaven? You know when you see it in all the children's storybooks, it's basically just the sun, a kind of turbo sun, right? And you have Paul like this, and the sun's rays are really fierce. No, it wasn't. The light which shone from heaven shone at noon. You'll find that in the 13th verse of Acts 26, I think, or the 14th. It shone at noon, and it was what? Brighter than the sun. The light which shone from heaven wasn't sun. It was a light which was brighter than the sun. Not the sun at day is dying in the west, but the sun at noonday. And so So when he says, listen, I'll tell you something. The same God who said, light shine out of darkness, and it did. He said, this is the wonder of it. He made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ.